So, good evening, everyone. We have Mr. V. Lakshmi Kumaran, the founder and managing partner from Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan Attorneys, joining us today for the interview with Business World. We will be talking about your journey, talking about how you proceeded in your life as an advocate, how you started out in your career, and what do you think the impact of this current situation of COVID-19 is on the legal fraternity, on the economy of India? So we have a few questions that we would want to ask you. And we'd start out with the first question, which is like, what motivated you to get started in law? Why did you choose law as a subject to study in college?
Oh, thank you, Nisha. uh, I come from a very lower middle class family in a remote place in Tamil Nadu. And I did my master's in mathematics because mathematics is one of my very favorite subjects. I love that subject. In fact, I was a lecturer in Madras University in mathematics after I graduated from the university. And one day my professor asked me to write IAS exams. Then I asked him, "Are you not happy with me?" He said, "No, you're doing very well, but there will be age bar later. Why don't you write?" So I wrote the exam, I qualified. I opted to become Indian Revenue Service Officer. I went to Masuri training and all those things. Then I was posted in Chennai as Assistant Collector Excise at that time. The lawyers used to come and argue before me, and they will used to give all sorts of jargons, res judicata, sub silentio, all sorts of things. I didn't understand any of those because I'm from a mathematics background. So the only way to pass proper orders, rebutting or accepting their arguments of the lawyers, is to understand the law. So I joined Madras Law College in the evening. I did my work in the daytime. I went back to the college in the late night and came back again at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and I worked like that. And that is how I did my law. At that time, my doing law was not for doing practicing law. It is basically to write good orders so that my orders are not unnecessarily being upset or quashed by the courts of law.
And
Then I was transferred.
In which year did you start out studying law?
I started way back in 1976, 77.
So why did you?
And
Yes,
yeah,
you were saying.
you were saying you want to ask me something?
Okay, so why did you move? So I wanted to ask because studying
I will complete.
doing
I will
an
complete.
MSc in mathematics
Yes.
is a very unconventional choice after studying like doing your graduation in law. So what what made you decide on that move from law to?
I'm coming to that. After about 5 years or so in the field, I was transferred as Undersecretary in the Ministry of Finance in charge of budget preparation. Tax legislations have been made and all of things. Well, we made a lot of litigations came on the drafting of the provisions have been challenged in the courts of law. And I was deputed to brief the Attorney General of India at that time to defend the government's cases. So Mr. Parasaran was the Attorney General then, so I went and briefed him. And I was also present in the Supreme Court when the major matters are being handled. And that was the time when I realized that the decision-making process in the courts is so transparent. Every question is asked, diametrically opposite views are being expressed, and then the judges make a decision on this point. And in fact, I must also say, with greatest respect for Mr. Parasaran, also encourage me that yes, you have the legal acumen, you can start. And I started in 85 after spending about 11 years or so in the government. And I never had any major dream or something. So if I was able to make whatever salary I was getting as a undersecretary, if I can get that salary, I'm good enough. That's what I was. My expectations are not very big. So I started with a very small room in Safdarjung enclave, and then started. I had no friends, no corporate client as friends. I was not a member of any clubs, Gymkhana club, and all those things, etc. And then my resources very, very few. But God has been kind, and 2-3 months later, some matter started coming. Initially, it came as in trickles, then it became a stream, then it became a river, then it became a sea, then it became a tsunami. What happened was, parallelly, I recruited and trained a lot of juniors, because I always feel that it is better to train good juniors, and they can become good lawyers. So that is how the whole thing started, the journey. And so the motivating factor is the transparency, and then the thrill of arguing matters in the court, where adrenal pumping is the highest when you are actually taking out matters in various courts and argue the case. That is the reason why I am a lawyer now, 35 years now.
So what are the similarity, Mr. Lakshmi Kumaran, since I met you twice and I sought your view last year in March, 14-15 months back, and tell me, what are the similarities between mathematics and law?
Oh, there are lots of similarities. In fact, I must tell you, mathematics, law, music, and chess, they have a lot of connections.
And please elaborate on that.
See, mathematics, especially higher mathematics, is purely logic. Function analysis, topology, modern algebra, all of them involve logic. And once you become a good mathematician, the logic is ingrained in you.
Sure.
And law is nothing but logic. This step to this step. This argument can lead to this or not. A is greater than B, B is greater than C, then A is greater than C. If A is greater than B, B is less than C, you can't say anything about A and C. And this is so simple to tell, but when you're actually preparing a brief, when see some orders which have been passed with authority where the logic is missing, immediately your mind says, something is wrong here, and then develop it. Same in the case of chess. You have to anticipate moves of other side. Nth move you must do before you start one move. Same in the case of law. You must anticipate what the argument other side, prepare for others. And again, the case of music, especially I'm talking about classical music, whether it is Carnatic music or Hindustani music. The boundaries are fixed. For a raga, the boundaries are fixed. You can't go beyond. If you go beyond, Malkhong will not be Malkhongs. But within this boundary, you have infinite freedom to elaborate the notes without repeating even once. Sorry. So, again, permutation combination. The entire music, if you look at swaras, within that raga, you have to necessarily put all the permutation combination logically. That is why I say mathematics, music, chess, and law. There are
So
a lot of connections.
I know we know that you're good at law and mathematics. Are you also good at music and chess?
I can say I am fairly good in chess, but I am very good in music, not as a musician, but as a connoisseur. I understand the intricacies of ragas. I enjoy the fineness of the music. I do. And I have a daughter. She is a musician. In fact, Sharanya is also a lawyer, but she is a great musician. And she learned music in her own house with a teacher. And then I used to spend maximum time. I have not learned music that way to sing, but I have learned music to enjoy.
Fantastic. I want to ask you, you had the experience of working on the side of the government, right? You started your career with the government, right? So these days, you're one of the biggest advisors to the government of India also on tax issue, on a policy, on a WTO level, on tax treaties. And even on when you work with corporates, that understanding of how the government, how the officers of the government, whether in the IRS or bureaucracy, view a certain development would have helped you. Tell us, what is it unique to the government's working that most lawyers don't understand, and what you understand. You meaning you and your firm. It's a very large firm. In 2017, it had 10 partners, then it became 9. I'm told it has 15, 16 partners now.
About 40 partners.
40 partners. You have 40 partners.
About 400 plus lawyers now.
400 plus lawyers, 40 partners. So what does your firm understand about how government does business, how it interprets orders that others don't understand? Tell us the nuances about what you specifically understand about government.
I understand, first of all, their constraints. We must realize, as far as the government is concerned, they have to work under tremendous constraints. The ministers have political agenda. The bureaucracy has a continuation agenda. The tax assessees have a different agenda. And they have to match all these things. Second, a person who drafts the legislation cannot think of all probabilities and possibilities to happen in the future. It is impossible. So therefore, there will be some limitation with regard to his ability to draft at the given circumstances. We must realize that. And there is no point in finding fault with the bureaucracy saying that they have done things wrong, look at this, etc., etc. No. You must really sympathize and also understand why they are doing like this. You may have best of the presentation or the best of the case, but the government may reject it. Not because the proposal is bad, but there are other better proposals to accept immediately here. So if you don't understand that dynamics, then we always try to find fault with that. So therefore, I don't say I know how the government functions, because the government thinking changes, and then as an individual what I think and what the majority of the officers think may be different. But I can only say one thing, but I never get annoyed with bureaucracy when they don't accept your proposal or something. I take it with a smile, because there are other constraints for them. We understand and leave it there. But we do prepare much better when you go for a presentation, whether the court or this thing. And one more thing also we must realize, sir. I thought you were going to ask a question. Lakshmi, you were in government arguing for the government. You switched over here. How did you change over your mindset? Many people do ask this question to you. So I'm sorry, I'm not putting words into your mouth.
No, that's a very valid question. Go ahead.
And my answer is this. While I was in the government also, I was having a neutral mind. I never took a decision against SSC for the heck of it. Because some people take safe decisions. But it's better to save a decision against SSC in favor of the revenue. We are safe, no questions are asked, etc. But I never was like this. If there is a decision to be given in favor of SSC, I do it. Because I am confident, I am doing the right thing, etc. I have no qualms. I have nothing to hide. I have no other angle to it. It is pure professional. And therefore, when I switched over also, I am neutral. Even today, when a client comes to me and then says, sir, I want to do this, etc., I'll tell him, this is not correct. This is not wrong. Out. This particular portion, I will not allow you to do so. This is a portion you can do so. Even a litigation, when it comes, you may have a demand of about 100 crores. I will tell this 7 crores is payable. You better pay. I will defend you for 93 crores. I never take a position that even the 7 crores I will win for you. It never makes any sense to me. Therefore, so long as you take a position which is neutral, which is correct, and doesn't affect your ultimate ethical standards, you can do it. Therefore, I never found any great difference between being in the government or outside the government, because my mind worked neutrality.
Good. Since you talked about litigation and you talked about taxes and if there's a demand, what do you think of the government's order in the case of Vodafone and the telecom companies? If you're an advisor, we will not go into details, but on a philosophical level, what do you?
The philosophical level, the 2-3 things could have been done. I'm talking from this side, even if in the government side. A decision was given by the Supreme Court of India. Taking this particular case, the capital gain outside India, when two transactions are taking place outside India, is not taxable in India. That's what the Vodafone case is about. It did have tremendous impact as far as the revenue is concerned, for so many other transactions are taking place, and India would have lost a lot of that. But at that point of time, if the Honorable Finance Minister had taken a brief and go to other countries and say, here is a country where the Supreme Court of India passes a judgment quashing the demand, the multinational company outside India and demand more than $1 billion has been quashed. Therefore, this country has the best of the judicially. Therefore, come and invest here.
So it was a message to the world which we lost an opportunity.
Exactly. And two, amend the law for the future. Nobody says you should not. But amending the law retrospectively has killed the initiative of the various people to come to India. Oh, if judgment is given in favor, it will be reversed by a legislation. So that is the tactical thing.
You're absolutely right. The coal, I'm not going into how the coal blocks were allotted, but the licenses in telecom, the coal blocks were allotted by the government of India, and they were quashed through, a Supreme Court order. Now, again, I'm not going into technicalities of check, but I'm saying from an investor confidence, from a political stability, from a political economic stability, we sent out the wrong signal to investors that we do not have any continuity in our policy. There is no certainty of investment, and there will be policy decisions in the future with effect from retrospect. So is this country safe to invest? Is this country, if I may use the term, does it have consistency of policy across the regimes?
See, basically, there is a conflict between the consistency and rule of law. A rule of law with consistency is very difficult. That is why I think Mr. Harish Salve has gone on record to say that these decisions were actually the decisions that sent the wrong signal. He never said the decisions are wrong, but the decisions definitely sent the wrong signal, and therefore the investments are very less important. It could have been much better. But in any case, I think it's a bigger question to discuss, debate whether the rule of law, whether the concerned minister should have been given the license properly or not, etc., whether it is subject to judicial review. I mean, I can discuss forever.
Yeah, and also, while we honor the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court by and large is fantastic, and we have very upright judges in spite of whatever people may say. But sometimes the overactivism of the Supreme Court and giving orders without looking at the implications of the orders for the country in the long term, the Supreme Court has done activism which really hasn't helped the country. I mean, forget any individual player.
But I don't know. I mean, as you rightly said, I have the highest regard for the judiciary. And I would say that some of the judgment delivered by them is far better than any judgment you can hear from any other country. So impartial. And I have also noticed that the judgments are delivered by the Honorable Supreme Court or in court in this country without taking into account who is standing before them. Is a rich man or a poor man, which language he speaks, which country he comes from, is immaterial for them. They decide the point of law on the facts and the law as such. It is the greatest tribute to our courts, greatest tribute. Now, as I said, we can get into a discussion in the decision-making process. If there is something wrong, then the Supreme Court comes to the conclusion there is no way but to cancel. But can they do it prospectively or not is a bigger question. I don't want to get into a debate at this point of time here. If there is a seminar, we can discuss that. But suffice it to say that the government also had other remedies to overcome these difficulties, which they also did not have. So we'll leave it there and then we proceed to other questions.
My last question, and then Anisha can come in. Do you think litigation between companies and government and litigation overall post-COVID will go up? If yes, why? And if you don't think it will go up substantially, why?
Sir, I will say one thing. COVID or no COVID, the friction, the tug of war between the taxman and the taxpayer is one of the oldest. In a country like India, where the taxman does not leave, he will fight to the last to the Supreme Court. And so also assessee is necessarily be dragged up to the Supreme Court. So this is the reality of life. Unless we change the attitude of the officers, which I don't think it is possible in the present circumstances. Look at the way, after the COVID, the economic slowdown will be there, revenue collection will be less, government is under tremendous pressure, they have already given several financial packages, they need revenue, the only revenue is tax revenues apart from other revenues. So therefore, there will be pressure and they can't increase the rate of taxes because it is not politically correct. Therefore, the existing rate, they have to collect to maximize the revenue. So therefore, there will be some, I can expect some demands which are not sustainable, but make the demand, pass an order, collect some 10-20% at the point of time, let us see later on. So if this is the attitude, then obviously the dispute will continue. So COVID could be a reason for increasing, not necessarily decreasing. However, if the government says, hey, the economy is not doing well, assessors are having difficulties, let us not put that, put a moratorium on all those type of unnecessary litigation for 1 or 2, 3 years. Let us now build the economy. If that is the attitude, then the litigation will come down drastically.
Fantastic. Anisha?
I'll just take it from there. So basically, like you were just talking about, like the cases between companies and government or any other matter as such. But do you think that there are any specific kind of like policies which the government needs to quickly adapt in order to like encounter the post-COVID situation, like whether that is with regards to tax or with regards to the economy or like the country's revenue earning capacity? Are there certain policies which you think that the government needs to quickly adapt?
Yeah, I think a very good question, Anja. See, now the COVID-19 has shown the whole world how fragile we are, how fragile our economies are. And a virus which does not even weigh even 0.5 grams has brought the whole world to the knees. Along with that, the geopolitical situation now is that not in favor of China. There is definitely, I'm thinking in the near future or the long distance future, there will be investment going out of China. India has a good chance to attract that type of thing. So therefore, I can understand the foreign direct investment can come in a very big way if we play our card properly. We need to necessarily showcase to the world that we are stable, rule of law, and we invite.
So when you talk about stability, are there any specific industries that you think the government needs to keep its focus on?
That I think. See, basically, if there are about 200, 300 industries in China which are likely to be shifted, I think I'm sure the government already made a proper analysis. Which are the industries India would like to invite? And it's not difficult. I'm sure they have already got the complete list. So all we need to do is touch the custom tariff properly, increase the custom duties on the finished goods, and decrease the duty on the components, and thereby give a very advantageous position for the manufacturing in India. And similarly, with regard to trade policies, there are several things we can do within the WTO constraints. No problem at all. And apart from inviting foreign investments, India must also request and make the situation conducive for the domestic investors themselves. There are quite a number of people in India who want to invest, who want to thrive. But we should make the situation so conducive that they can also come, and in fact, it will act. So all these things are possible, and India should utilize this opportunity to its great advantage.
So just going back a little bit about how, like you were talking about your career before we started asking about COVID-19. So why did you get started with like litigation, and what motivated you to get started? Have like any planning on like getting started with it, or did it just happen as an event of chance over your career?
I like the litigation. I told you. Seeing the proceeding before the Supreme Court actually, I would say, created a great interest in me that this is the place where I should spend my time intellectually, and
Hmm.
therefore I started therefore litigation as the main subject, and I liked it, and even today I like it. In fact, when I am not arguing a matter for a week or 10 days, in fact, about last 2 weeks now, about 2 months now, it is like a drug addict withdrawal symptoms. So I'm really waiting for another case to go and argue.
Hmm.
So that is how it is. So as far as why did I start on my own? One, I didn't want to go and apply for a job somewhere, and secondly, I had, as I told you, my expectations are very less. So I was confident that I will. So when expectations are not much, I think you can take these type of risks. That's what I did.
So how were your initial years with Lakshmi Kumar and Sridharan? Like, how was it like to start out the firm, and what were the initial landmark cases which the firm got when you look back?
Oh, first 3 4 months where small cases are coming, etc. But thereafter, matters started coming. In fact, I also love speaking in various chambers of commerce and university students and CA institutes and all those things. Probably because I was a lecturer in mathematics earlier. So I love teaching. I love speaking, public speaking. So I did speak a number of occasions on request from various associations.
Okay.
Perhaps that also spread the message to the people that yes, this guy is passionate and he knows what he's talking about. I think
Hmm.
these two put together, I think, sent the matters to me. Of course, it's God's blessings.
Hmm.
My best, I am zero in business development. I can't do business development,
Hmm.
but my God is my business development manager. He does it.